They say a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Well, with God as my witness, I am that fool.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com. Down there, we like magic, you know by now. And today, super sweet budget deck for you. It's only going to cost about $30. There's tons of synergy, and we get to play a bunch of really underutilized cards in the standard right now. We get to play everything from like a breakthrough modern card that hasn't seen a whole lot of standard play yet to the quote-unquote worst uncommon in Aether Revolt. So there's a lot of cool stuff in this deck. Let me take you through it. Today is Abzan Renegade Machinations? What? Now, there's a lot of little synergies going on in this deck, but I want to focus mainly on the interaction between three different cards, or all the little interactions between these three different cards. We'll play 4 whole copies of all of these. 4 copies of Renegade Rallier, 4 copies of Gonti's Machinations, and 4 copies of Restoration Specialist, another card that hasn't seen a whole lot of play but looks kind of powerful. That's right, it's a Gonti's Machinations deck. You don't see those every day. A lot of people have asked me for this, but a lot of people have also said that Gonti's Machinations is awful. In this deck, we have a lot of ways of bringing this thing back from the graveyard. Both Rallier and Restoration Specialist can bring this back from the graveyard. Rallier puts it right into play, Specialist puts it in her hand, but whatever, it only costs 1 mana. Obviously, the magic number here is 7. If you can get 7 activations of Gonti's Machinations, you can win the game. This game plan provides actual inevitability against control decks, which is kind of neat, and against aggro, it can at least hold them off for a few turns, although Machinations is not the best card in the aggro matchup. But still, if we can just get a few activations of Machinations over the course of a game, we get 3 or 4 activations, we've done a bunch of damage, and we've gained a bunch of life back too. That's a few attack steps worth of life. And Rallier and Specialist are both good outside of just bringing Gonti's Machinations back. Rallier has a total of 25 cards in this deck that it can bring back from the graveyard and put right slap into play on the battlefield on your side. So Renegade Rallier is just super sweet. We've got a ton of ways to activate Revolt, and one of them is actually Restoration Specialist, and another is Gonti's Machinations. It's pretty cool that both of these can activate Revolt for Rallier. Machinations can do it for free, and Restoration Specialist only 1 mana. And Specialist has a lot more to do other than just bring back Machinations in this deck. It's got a total of 10 different enchantments to bring back, including Machinations, and it's got 6 different artifacts that it can bring back too. And that's not all I have to say about those 3 cards. By the way, I'll constantly keep bringing them up as we go through this deck tag, but before we go any further, I might as well go ahead and tell you about the 3 Greenwheel Liberators in the deck. We need another thing with Revolt, honestly, if we're going to make the whole Revolt theme worth playing at all. So I'd like another big thing with Revolt, and I'd also like if it'd be a big meaty creature that can both trade in combat when we need it to against some decks, and just take big chunks off our opponent's life total super early in the game. We've got 6 different ways of getting this on turn 2, and it becomes a breeze by turn 3. Also worth noting that Renegade Rallier will always return this as a 4-power creature. That's pretty sweet. That's, 3 mana for 7 power on 2 creatures. That's a bunch of value right there. So if you just want to beat face, you have that option too, We want to just, basically play a big creature for as little mana as possible. Greenwheel Liberator does that for us. But if we're going to play all these cards with Revolt, we have to at some point trigger Revolt. So, and we've already seen Restoration Specialist, Gonti's Machinations. Both those things can trigger Revolt, but we need a couple of ways to do it reliably on turn 2, especially if we want to play Greenwheel Liberator. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at 3 Unbridled Growth and 3 Renegade Map. Now, both of these are free Revolt triggers anytime that you want them, and one of them can fix our mana, which is invaluable in this budget deck. We need to be able to do that. So we're playing 3 whole colors. And it draws us a card. Unbridled Growth is just really, really good. And Renegade Map can also fix our mana, thin our deck a little bit, puts an artifact into the graveyard so the Restoration Specialist can bring it back. Also, Rallier can bring this back if you want to. It's just a really versatile card in this deck that we can play for any color mana. Map is also an artifact in the graveyard for our 2 main deck cards with Delirium, and our few sideboard cards with Delirium too, so it can be important to put an artifact in the graveyard. Renegade Map does that too. It just kind of does everything. While we're talking about fixing mana and such, I'm going to play 3 copies of Attune with Aether here in the main deck. Not only do we have Gonti's Machinations, but we also have another energy sink in the main deck here, so getting the 2 energy can be really, really important, and fixing your mana, thinning your deck, all the stuff that Renegade Map does. But we also get 2 energy on top of it, which is really nice, because, that's all we need for Machinations. And that's all we need for the other card, by the way, that we're sinking energy into. So just all the stuff that Attune with Aether does. It's a really popular card right now, and there's a reason for that. While I'm showing you stuff that produces energy, I might as well also tell you about the 3 copies of Live Fast in the deck, which is another card with multiple functions. Obviously, if we have a Machinations in play, this will net us another energy, but it already gives us enough energy to sacrifice Machinations. That's sweet, you know. We need some card advantage in this deck, and Live Fast does that for us, you know. Also gives us energy off of Machinations, just everything we want. Live Fast gives for us, you know, so let's play at least 3 copies of that too. Here's another thing that produces energy for us and has a bunch of other synergies. Here's 2 copies of Woodweavers Puzzleknot right here. At first I went with 4 Puzzleknot, but sometimes having to pay 3 to sack it kind of sucks. But the enter the battlefield trigger is always good, you know, no matter what. This can be brought back with Renegade Rallier, it can be brought back with Restoration Specialist. That's pretty sweet. It gives us a butt ton of energy and a goodly amount of life too. So along with Gonti's Machinations, we can gain a bunch of life in the course of the game and just keep us in things. This also triggers Revolt, obviously, and is a card in the graveyard for delirium. So in a way a little bit like Renegade Map, this just does everything we wanted to do. And also produces energy, so like an extra thing that we want to do. So, you know, definitely at least a couple of copies of Puzzleknot. I was playing 4, like I said, but I wouldn't cut it to 0. It still deserves a place. But we're making all this energy in the deck, and we can't spend it all on Machinations, although we're going to spend a lot of it on Machinations. But we're also going to play 3 copies of Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. Now, at first I was playing Lone Rider in this slot for reasons, and it actually got moved to the sideboard. It's still in the 75 cards, but I'll talk to you about Lone Rider a little bit later. Ended up playing Glint-Sleeve Siphoner because we just needed another thing to sink some of this energy into, especially when we don't have a Machinations on board. So that's good. We also need to have some card advantage so that we can draw the pieces that we need to draw. So another plus in its favor, you know, enters the battlefield and goes ahead and gives us an energy. That's a point in its favor. So lots of cool stuff. This produces energy, it can sink energy, and it can draw us cards to allow us to get the pieces that we need. Now let's talk about some removal, because we got to play some of that in this format, God knows. So here's what we're playing, starting with yet another card that has a bunch of synergy in this deck, and just unconditionally kills whatever we want. Here's 3 copies of Sinister Concoction. Now, Concoction, for an investment of just 2 mana that we can spread out over multiple turns, which is already good, can unconditionally kill Heart of Kirin and also Felidar Guardian in response to like the combo trying to go off. So that's just the 2 big problem things in the format. This can kill for very, very cheap, and once you get it on the board, it's uncounterable to use its ability, obviously. So, you know, decks that play Saheeli and also counter spells can't really do anything about it once it's on board, which is really, really important. And this also fuels things like Revolt, obviously. This puts a card in the graveyard for Revolt. It's an enchantment that we can get back with Restoration Specialist. We can also get it back with Renegade Rallier, just so you know. Just look at all those synergies, and I'm not actually even done. This also does a damage to us, so Gonti's Machinations will give us an energy. That's pretty cool. And in this deck, we do not care at all about like discarding cards or putting the top card of our library into our graveyard. We can get those cards back with so many different pieces, and we don't care at all about letting go of them. I'm also going to play 2 copies of To the Slaughter in the deck. That's the card with Delirium right there. And once we do have Delirium, which actually we can get fairly quickly in this deck, for your information, To the Slaughter just gets ridiculous. This ruins Saheeli combo an awful lot of the time, and it's even good against the aggro decks in the format, especially post game 1 when they will side in their Chandras a lot of the time. So this is just a fantastic card right now that has a bunch of play, and especially once Delirium is online, it's just ridiculous. Because automatic 2-for-1s tend to be ridiculous. We're also going to play 1 copy of Anguished Unmaking in this deck for a few different reasons. Exile's really nice, especially against Scrap Heap Scrounger, because we don't have a whole lot of plans against it, but it's seeing a little bit less play, so whatever. But it's still in Mardu, and we got to worry about it in Mardu. But in any case, this is good for a few other reasons. You know, it can take out Planeswalkers unconditionally. It can stop Saheeli combo dead in its tracks. That's cool. It makes us lose life, so this also works with Gonti's Machinations. And, you know, I feel like we're gaining enough life in this deck from Machinations and, like, Woodweavers Puzzleknot and stuff that we can play more than a few cards like Live Fast and Anguish Unmaking that make us lose life. Add to that, by the way, the utility that Anguished Unmaking has. You know, I've already said creatures, planeswalkers, stops a Saheeli combo, whatever, but it can also take out whatever artifact you want and the odd enchantment that you might need to take out. Just super, super versatile card and gets rid of the thing forever. So I feel like at least 1 copy of Unmaking is where we want to be. Just to finish things off, we're playing a couple of other pseudo-expensive one-ofs in the deck. And yeah, that's a couple of one-ofs, but we're drawing a bunch of cards in this deck. We've got like 9 main deck cards that are capable of drawing cards. And a Planeswalker that's technically capable of drawing his cards. Let me show you that. 1 copy of Nissa Vital Force. Now, in a more expensive deck, this card would probably be just Liliana, and we'd probably make room for 2. But in this world, I feel like 1 Nissa Vital Force is just fine. It's only like $5 right now, and it does a lot of good stuff for the deck. It can technically be the biggest creature in the deck. That's pretty cool. And the best thing about it is that it's another thing that can bring whatever permanent that we want back from the graveyard. And one thing especially cool about it is that it can bring back Renegade Ralliers, which is very, very nice. We need something to be able to do that so we can keep the Rallier party going. And she's really, really easy to ultimate, and her ultimate is especially good in this deck, where we have Attune with Aether, we have Renegade Rallier, we have Evolving Wilds. There's just a ton of things in this deck that work super well with her ultimate, so drawing a bunch of cards is also pretty super sweet. You know something else that Nissa can just bring back from the graveyard? 1 copy of Noxious Gearhulk right here in the deck, which is usually a friend to Liliana, but still works just as well with Nissa. This is sort of importantly an artifact for delirium in the graveyard, and really importantly, this can be brought back by Restoration Specialist, which is pretty sweet. This is the other biggest creature in the deck, and it's really hard to block sometimes, especially if you've brought it back a couple of times and blown some big stuff up. This is really good against like green-black counters. You know, this can be good even against aggro if you can get to it. So, fantastic card, and I feel like we've got the $3 required to play it. Also, even though we've got like Greenwheel Liberator and sometimes even Renegade Rallier can do some damage for us when we need it to, we can't just rely on those cards in Gonti's Machinations. It's nice to have a couple of cards like Nissa and Noxious Gearhulk that can essentially be huge creatures to finish the game in a hurry when we need to close things out. We're playing 20 lands in the deck, but fear not. We're drawing a bunch of cards, and we're playing Attune with Aether, and we're playing Renegade Map. It's not too hard to get your mana in this deck. And we could throw in a couple of Blooming Marsh if we had a couple of bucks. I think they're like $7 or $8 a piece right now, and I really don't want this to be a $50 deck. We get by very well. We need to play a bunch of basic lands anyway, because we're playing both Attune and Renegade Maps. We need a bunch of basics anyway. Aether Hub is really well funded in this deck. We're making a lot of energy, and Evolving Wilds is great for Revolt. So, yes to all of these. I don't feel like we actually need to play too many duels. Here's the sideboard right here, and yeah, you're reading things right. You have just seen a Revolt deck that doesn't play Fatal Push. Card is $5 a piece, and if you had the money, you would definitely play the full 4 of Fatal Push in this deck. You would do that all day, but again, I don't necessarily want this to be a $50 deck, but if you have any amount of Fatal Push, you make room for them in the deck. As it is, though, 2 natural states are in there, mostly against Heart of Kiran, but can also take out the odd, random artifact, like Scrap Heap Scrounger is another good example. Jedi Offshoot is in there against aggro. We would like that. And it's actually really good with all the stuff that drops lands in the deck. Renegade Map can go put lands in our hand. Aether Hub, not Aether Hub, Attune with Aether can go put lands in our hand. So really, really nice to have something that can gain us life when we play lands. And it's good with Evolving Wilds too. Here's Lone Rider. Right here, Lone Rider is really kind of nice against aggro. It can actually block a little bit better than you might think. There's a few 1 toughness creatures in Mardu, especially if you're playing against the version that doesn't play Ballista. But the first strike is actually somewhat good on this card, and it can attack into Toolcraft Exemplar pretty easily too. And Lone Rider, we've got a bunch of stuff like Machinations and the green Puzzleknot, Woodweavers Puzzleknot, that gain us 3 life. And, if all things are going well, we'll be bringing back Machinations an awful lot over the course of the game and gaining 3 life over multiple turns. So something like Lone Rider becomes very, very desirable, especially when Renegade Rallier can bring it back, and at our end step, we instantly get a 4/4 first strike trample lifelink. We're playing 1 copy of the Black Puzzleknot right there because it's pretty good in long, grindy control matches. I play it, I boarded in the 1 copy against Saheeli, but I also boarded in against Blue-Black Control because those are really long games and you want a way to draw more cards than your opponent. That's very important. And this is something that Restoration Specialist can bring back. Renegade Rallier can bring it back. It's an artifact in the graveyard, which is good for a couple of reasons. So, not bad. We'll play at least the 1 copy of the Black Puzzleknot. 2 copies of Murder for a lot of reasons, and 4 Pick the Brain for Saheeli almost specifically. Let's just cover a couple of matchups real quick as far as the boards go. Versus Mardu, we're going to board out a Machinations. We're going to board out one Concoction against Mardu, a Restoration Specialist, 3 Glint-Sleeve Siphoners for the Lone Riders. We're going to board out a Live Fast and a Nissa here in this matchup. We're going to board in 2 Natural States for the various artifacts, 3 Jedi Offshoot to gain some life and block, and the 3 Lone Riders, because it's just fantastic against these aggro decks, especially when you get it to transform. In the Saheeli matchup, we're going to board out a bunch of cards too. We're going to board out 1 map, 1 Unbridled Growth, a Greenwheel Liberator, because we just boarded out some ways to get Revolt early. We're going to board out 2 of the Green Puzzleknot. We're going to board out a Noxious Gearhulk and another copy of Machinations here in this one. And we're going to board in 4 Pick the Brain. We're going to board in 2 Murder and 1 Black Puzzleknot. Black Puzzleknot for card advantage. I've already talked about that. We're going to board in the 2 Murders so that we have more options against Saheeli combo. Note that you can also board in these Murders against Mardu if you want to board out more Machinations or anything else, really. And then the 4 Pick the Brain is just crazy in this matchup because even if you don't have Delirium and you get it on the play or even on the draw, you can take out an important card and, you know, get rid of that combo piece, put it into exile. Very important. But if you do have Delirium, this thing is bonkers against Saheeli combo. Here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 63 points, which is really high for a deck that only costs $30. $30 is a very, very reasonable budget, and the deck scores well in a bunch of different categories. It's highly resilient because a bunch of different cards bring things back from the graveyard. You know, Renegade Rallier, Restoration Specialist, and Nissa all bring stuff back, and we've got a bunch of cards that draw cards in the deck, and that affects our consistency and our resiliency. The deck is somewhat versatile and has a little bit of defense for the kind of deck that it is, and it's highly, incredibly, ridiculously synergistic. Almost every piece in the deck feeds in to the next one very, very well. You know, a lot of these cards, if you didn't notice, work well with multiple other cards in the deck. I did a lot of talking with my hands there. I don't know what all of that was. But anyway, there's an awful lot of synergy in this deck. You know, we can just keep bringing back Machinations with either Specialist or the Rallier if we want to. Or we can use Rallier to bring back Specialist or the, 21 other cards that the stupid thing can bring back. Rallier is the star of this deck, but Machinations is just hilarious, so I had to play it. And bringing it back all those times, 7 times, is not unheard of if you can grind the game out, especially late in the game versus control. We actually do thrive versus control decks because of all of the different resilient pieces that we have. Control really doesn't like when we can bring stuff back from the graveyard, and that's all the deck does, honestly. And there's really not a whole lot of options right now for beating graveyard strategies. If we can play out of the graveyard, as long as we have the time to do it, there's not a whole lot our opponent can do about it. So try out this Energy, Delirium, Machinations, Revolt, Rallier deck featuring Restoration Specialist whenever you want to. That's a lot of stuff, but it's not all jammed into one because they all, funnel into each other so well. It's not like one card works, with one other card on a one-to-one basis. Almost every card works with almost every other card. So try this thing out. It's a whole lot of fun, and let me know how you feel. And tomorrow, or the next day, in the next couple of days, we're going to do a competitive version of this deck that plays pretty much all different cards except for Renegade Rallier. But I'm tapped out for now. Let me know how you felt about this one down there in the comments. For $30, it is all the fun you could ever hope to have. So if you like the video, like the video. You can also sub if you're new. Make sure you hit the bell to get the notifications, and follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.